Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us back. I have Rob Quigley and Mary Jane Hayden, and they are going to discuss the standard design scope of services and staff hour forms updates.
Thank you, Jackie. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. All right. In the past year, we had a few updates to the standard scope of services and staff hour estimation guidelines and forms. Basically, through professional services contracts, consulting engineers provide PD&E and design services to the department. And standard scope and staff hour estimation guidelines and forms should offer direction for uniform negotiations of these types of contracts statewide. And we're going to focus on the design part of that. The guidelines were originally developed over 10 years ago and provide periodic updates. It had come to our attention a few years ago that some concerns were being raised over each district having their own standard scope language. So in 2012 and 2013, task teams for each discipline were made up of members from FDOT and the consulting industry were reassembled. Each team reviewed and updated the standard scope language, corresponding staff hours, and the basis for the estimate of the hours for their respective discipline. The desired outcome of this update was to have consistent statewide scope language and uniform estimation of the hours to provide to professional services. Input was solicited from the district project managers, discipline leads, and experts, and the consulting industry, many of whom were already part of the teams. The teams looked at district standard scopes that had evolved over the years and identified best practices and some district issues that may have been occurring due to the way things were worded in the scope or staff hour forms. This information was used to develop the revisions to the scope and staff hour forms to be more consistent, predictable, and repeatable. The current version of the scope of services was released on November 1st, 2013, and made available for immediate use. According to the current FDOT procedure 375.030.020, which governs the standard scope and staff hour estimation guidelines for PD&E studies and design services. Moving forward, the teams will be reconvening to assess the implementation of the scope and staff hour updates that just occurred, and then we'll also be discussing today those changes. And again, for the future, they will evaluate if any other changes are necessary. If prior to the next scheduled update there are new requirements or mandatory changes that impact the scope or staff hour forms, an interim update will be communicated through the contact mailer and the DOT project management webpage. The standard scope of services and staff hour guidelines are maintained on the web, and to get there from the FDOT main page, you can find the project management office, go to the office resources, select documents and publications, and then on the next page under forms, click on design and PD&E staff hour forms and guidelines. Okay, this is a list of the disciplines included in the scope of services for design. The numbers in parentheses indicate the section or sections of the scope which the disciplines will have tasks, and we'll now go through each of these disciplines and highlight some of the major changes from this update. If you do have any questions related to the scope and staff hour updates, please type them in as a webinar question, and we'll do our best to respond to them at the end of the presentation. Please note that if you have any technical questions related to the specific discipline updates, we may not be able to answer all of them today, but we will follow up with the discipline teams to answer all the questions from the session. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jane Hayden to discuss the details of each discipline change.
Thanks, Rob. All right, let's begin with a general overview of some of the changes to the scope and staff hour forms. We made general clarifications, grammatical corrections, and formatting changes throughout the scope and staff hour forms. When a change was made to any of the discipline activities, that modification was also reflected in Activity 2, Project Description, as needed. The list of references shown under Task 2.20, Provisions for Work, was organized and updated to accommodate any revisions to the listed publications. And finally, the staff hour estimation forms and staff hour guidelines were reviewed and updated according to any changes made in the scope of services. The roadway discipline, most of the updates were clarifications and formatting. However, we'd like to note a few of the new items included in the updated version of the scope. These additions, such as risk assessment workshop or payment type selection report, were either non-existent or previously included in other tasks. The reason for adding these items is that the roadway team felt that they are significant enough to warrant a separate task and staff hour estimate. Also, all references to the comp book were removed. Per direction provided last July in the Roadway Design Bulletin 1311, comp books will no longer be required for projects led after July of 2014. Although the scope and staff hours were updated to remove reference to the comp book, an issue has been brought to our attention related to staff hours estimated for the development of summary of quantity sheets. Currently, both tasks 4.12 and 5.6 reference the development of summary of quantity sheets, and there's some overlap in staff hour estimation based on the current guidelines and suggested staff hour ranges. The roadway task team is reviewing this issue, and the interim guidance is to follow the direction provided in the roadway design bulletin. Per the bulletin, the increased work in the plan summary boxes will be offset by the reduced work of the computation book. No adjustment should be made to the designer's number of hours. So, task 4.12 is intended to include all efforts to develop quantities, such as calculations, developing shapes in CAD, etc. Task 5.6 should only include the hours necessary to produce the summary of quantity sheets in CAD, i.e. creating the tables using DOT CAD software. Staff hour range for this is being reviewed by the roadway task team. Some of the tasks in the drainage section were combined during this update. The interchange drainage map is now included with 5.3 drainage map. The design of outfalls is now covered in task 6.4, design of ditches, and 6.8, design of storm drains. Also, task 6.7 has been updated to now include pollutant loading calculations. New language was added to task 2.3, utilities coordination, and throughout section 7, utilities, to add more detail about what is expected in the coordination effort between the highway designer and the utility coordination manager for the project in the district utilities office. Some of these details include things like identifying minimum experience requirements for utility coordination manager for the project, and also listing specific steps of the utility coordination process. The big item that's changed in the utilities section is in task 7.3, make utility contacts. Previously, the determination of reimbursability was done by the district utility administrator. This has been changed now to be determined by the legal office. Task number 8.3 has been reorganized to include several subtasks for fieldwork. This task now includes subtasks for pond site alternatives, establishing wetland jurisdictional lines and assessments, species surveys, and archaeological surveys. Task number 8.14 mainly added a subtask number to existing items in the scope. For example, wetland impact analysis was in the previous version of the scope, but did not have an assigned task or subtask number. Now it's subtask number 8.14.3. Also, contamination impact analysis and asbestos survey were both moved from this task and made into two separate tasks. They're now task 8.16 and 8.17 respectively. It should be noted that most of the existing language in this section was not modified. The changes were mainly reorganization of the existing language and the addition of some new language. There were very few revisions in the structures, activities, and tasks during this update cycle. Under Activity 10, Structures, Bridge Development Report, tasks number 10.36 through 10.48 were deleted, and instead we are referred to Activities 12 through 16 to estimate these tasks as needed. There were also a few new tasks added to the scope services, including beam stability, bearing, and erection speed. Signing and pavement markings, signals, and lighting all had minimal changes as well. In general, details were added for various tasks, including no passing zone study, sign lighting and electrical calculations, QA/QC, and lighting justification report. These details were added to help define and provide clarifications to the standard work to be accomplished. The biggest change for landscape architecture was the additional language provided in Section 2.9. This language now identifies the need to coordinate with existing and proposed underground utilities, which may include lighting, drainage, or ITS. This change is a result of issues that we've encountered regarding the conflict between existing and proposed utilities and vegetation root systems, and also visibility issues resulting from branches. Terrestrial mobile LiDAR, which is activity 30 in the scope, is a new activity for surveying and mapping. Instead of adding this to the end of the scope, which would have been activity 35, it was added as 30, which placed it adjacent to all the other surveying and mapping activities. To make renumbering a little easier on ourselves, we moved geotech, the old 30, to the end, rather than renumbering architectural, noise barriers, and all the ITS activities. For architecture, details have been added to Section 2.14 regarding leadership in energy and environmental design, or LEED certification. Scope services now includes details such as defining the intent of LEED certification, identifying tasks required to rate a building's environmental impact, and identifying the state minimum level of certification as being certified buildings. Additionally, there were new tasks added to Section 31, including program review and verification, stair section and large stair plan and details, specific technical meetings as subtasks, LEED certification, and building information modeling, or BIM. There were very few revisions in the noise barrier impact design assessment in the design phase during this update cycle. There was one new addition of other noise barrier analysis in Section 32. Changes to ITS include an update to the language in Task 33.1, ITS analysis. This section was updated regarding closed-circuit TV cameras, vehicle detection devices, and highway advisory radio signs. Section 2.16 was updated to include language regarding FHWA Rule 940. Additionally, it should be noted again that coordination efforts between ITS and landscape architecture have been identified in Section 2.9 of the Scope of Services. Finally, the geotechnical section has been moved to number 35. Again, this is due to the addition of the terrestrial mobile LiDAR activity that was added with surveying and mapping activities. Rather than renumbering geotech, architectural, noise barriers, and all the ITS activities, we decided to only renumber geotech by moving it to the end of the Scope of Services. So with that, I'd like to say we're always looking for your feedback, so please send any questions or comments to either Rob or myself. This concludes our presentation on most of the recent updates to the Design Scope of Services and Staff Hour forms. So now we'll see if there's any questions out there that maybe we can address.